Brilliant. Felly, helo bawb, a croeso i'r webinar heno. Rhys Evans dwi, a dwi'n gweithio i'r Rhwydwaith Ffermio o'r Lles Natur yng Nghymru. Rhwydwaith offermwyr ydyn ni sy'n brwdfrydig dros dulliau ffermio sy'n gydnaws a bywyd gwyllt. A dyn ni'n angerddol dros ffermio sy'n gwarchod a gwella yr amgylchedd. Felly heno yma fyddwn ni yn trafod bob dim sy'n ymwneud â choed, coedwigoedd a gwrychoedd ar ein ffermdir. Mae coed yn bwnc llosg mawr y dyddiau yma. Bod Llywodraeth Cymru wedi gosod yn ôl y blannu 43,000 hectar o goetir newydd yng Nghymru erbyn 2030 a 180,000 erbyn y flwyddyn 2050. Ond mae hyn yn gallu cynnig cyfleoedd i ffermwyr, cyfleoedd i aresgyfeirio falle, neu cyfle i dderbyn ffynhonnell incwm am genach am blannu a rheoli coed ar y fferm. Ond ar y llaw arall, y ras i blannu coed gael effaith negyddol. Da ni'n gwybod am yr buddiannau niferus dros safbwynt baioamrywiaeth, mynd i'r afel o newid hinsawdd, busnes y fferm, ac gwella'r economi ehangach. Ond mae yna gwestiynau mawr wedi codi hefyd yn sgil y targedau hyn. Ac eich lle da ni'n mynd i blannu'r holl goed yma, pwy sy'n mynd i elwa, gall plannu'r goeden anghywir yn y lle anghywir gael effaith negyddol ar y baioamrywiaeth, a'r hinsawdd yn ogystal, a mi all hefyd effeithio ar gymunedau lleol. A wrth gwrs, be mae hyn oll yn ei olygu o safbwynt diogelwch bwyd. Felly mae bwnc diddorol a dadleuol dros ben. Mae byddwn ni'n trafod rhai o'r materion hyn yn y webinar heno gan dorw golwg craff a sut all amaethyddiaeth a choed gyd-fyw a'i gilydd. Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. I'm Rhys Evans. I work for the NFFN, the Nature Friendly Farming Network in Wales. We're a network of farmers that come together to champion the way of farming that is sustainable and good for nature. And tonight we'll be discussing farmland trees, woodlands, hedges and edges. As we all know, trees, very hot topic in Wales at the moment, particularly since the Welsh Government set the target of planting 43,000 hectares of new woodland by 2030 and 180,000 hectares by 2050. From a farmer's perspective, these targets can offer opportunities, diversification perhaps, or potential new income streams from farmland tree or hedgerow creation and their management. Trees can offer numerous benefits, improving biodiversity, tackling climate change, protecting our farmland natural assets, including livestock, buildings and fields, and they can also improve farm profitability and contribute towards a wider economy. But on the other hand, the race to plant trees can also yield negative effects, and it raises many questions and has prompted many recent debates. For example, where do we plant these trees and who benefits from their planting? Planting the wrong tree in the wrong place can have a negative effect on biodiversity and climate, so perverse outcomes. It can also affect local communities and begs the question, what does this mean for food security perhaps? So trees, a very interesting yet contentious issue. We're not going to solve all these issues this evening, but what we'll do is we will take a look at how trees and agriculture can potentially go hand in hand. And to do this, I'm delighted to join by our speakers today. We've got Jerry Langford, the Head of Policy at Coed Cadw, Woodland Trust Wales. Hilary Kehoe, who's the Chair of Nature Friendly Farming Network Cymru. And we've got Ruth as well from Broadleaf, Wales and Bron Farm. I'm not sure whether our fourth speaker, Mal Edwards, is here or not. I think he's having technical difficulties, but hopefully we'll be able to join later on. So the webinar is likely to last for about an hour and 15 minutes, depending on the technical issues and how many questions we receive. But it's not the end of the world if we go over time. So firstly, we'll start with Jerry, who will give an overview of the Woodland Trust in Wales, recommendations, if you like, or suggestions around woodland planting, hedges and edges, and a general overview of their benefits. So over to you, Jerry. Come on.
Diolch. Well, good evening, everyone. Noswaith dda. Diolch am y cyfle I siarad am gwercoedd a llainia. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a bit about hedges and edges. And I'll just share screen. Yeah, so my name's Jerry Langford. I work for Coed Cadw, the Woodland Trust in Wales, doing policy advocacy, particularly at the moment, doing a lot of work on the value and benefits of trees on farmland. So just to start with an illustration of how important tree cover on farmland is. If you look around the countryside, you'll see trees everywhere, and inevitably most of those trees are on farmland. Now, some of them, of course, are in woodlands, and the green blobs on this map, which is of the Conwy Valley just east of Llanrwst, that's the woodland cover. So that's the trees that are in woodland. But if you add to that all the tree cover that's outside of those woodlands, you can see how significant that extended network is. So these are the trees along hedgerows, stream edges, scattered across fields, all the other bits and pieces. And all together with the woodland, they make up a sort of continuous interconnected habitat network. So the cover of trees outside woodlands in Wales is about 93,000 hectares. So that's nearly 4.5% of the total land area of Wales. And it happens to be almost exactly the same as the land area occupied by ancient woodlands in Wales. So you can see that this component of the trees outside and in between woods is something like half the total native tree and woodland resource, because most of these trees are native species. It also contains much of the veteran and ancient tree heritage that we have. It's obviously highly attractive landscape, and these trees are part of the farm, but they're subject to all sorts of pressures, and particularly at the moment, of course, one being ash dieback. So just a few words more on the importance of ancient and veteran trees. The old and working trees used to fill the landscapes, and not just as sort of fruit and nut orchards, but trees were regularly lopped and cut for timber and also for foliage for browse. And Wales, like the rest of Britain, actually still has a much more substantial heritage of ancient trees than the rest of Europe. So just some basics about conserving this heritage. Obviously retain all the old trees if possible, along with their bits of broken branch and dead wood. Protect the root zone, particularly from compaction, from materials like fertilizer or manure, and of course from direct damage. And the challenge at the moment particularly is to provide those future replacements, particularly for all that lost ash. And we do have this pamphlet for landowners which contains this advice. So turning to the wider resource of all these trees on farms, what can they do for farming? And this diagram is just a simple attempt to try and summarize some of the range of benefits there. Some of them are quite intangible. It is actually quite well known that having trees around can improve your mental well-being, for example. They might make your property more attractive and hence more valuable. But others of the benefits are rather more tangible, particularly, for example, in relation to livestock welfare, in relation to protecting stream edges, and also sort of soaking up pollutants and sediment as buffer strips along streams. And of course, the old and long-established benefits of shade and shelter, also biosecurity. And just to look at a couple of those benefits in a bit more detail, the riparian protection, you've got this photo here is of bankside protection work, quite a narrow strip, but protected fence and planted with trees. Much wider buffer strips will be much more effective for the pollution interception. And also this certainly partial shade over the stream actually benefits the river and the fish in it. It sort of regulates the temperature. So it's important for conserving the sort of fisheries and the quality of the river. Another topical benefit, of course, is trees and carbon, and what all this means for sort of the aspiration for achieving net zero on the farm. And this diagram just illustrates some of the complexities involved of the flows in and out of trees. I'll sort of let people sort of examine it at its leisure, but any tree and woodland you have on the farm is doing two things just by being there. Firstly, it's a substantial store of carbon. And secondly, so long as those trees are still growing, they are taking a bit more carbon out of the atmosphere every year. So that's something that really needs to be factored into the calculations of net zero at the farm level. There's a bit more on the notes on this slide about the sort of carbon storage significance, not just of trees and woodland, but of other habitats on the farm. And all the linear habitats, the hedges and the boundaries contribute to that, as of course do peatland and also pasture on the high carbon soils. And there's a potential alignment here with biodiversity and wildlife. So turning to agroforestry more generally, so meaning by that term simply the use of trees within, as part of a farm business. This is a sort of crude classification just to sort of help clarify matters. So the top two lines on this chart are what I describe these sort of traditional forms of agroforestry. So you've got hedges and edges, if you like, the agroforestry of field, farm and riparian boundaries, obviously ancient land use. But you also have wood pasture, the sort of tree sheltered grazing that is a very substantial and characteristic feature, particularly in the Welsh uplands. And then on the third line, you've got the more intensive, more commercial use of trees actually as a crop or as a feature within crops. Not something that's practiced very widely yet in Wales, but a lot of opportunities there and a lot of interest. At the bottom, I've stuck in the short rotation coppice, which has its potential as well. So turning to the question of how to support the maintenance of trees on farms, and particularly our suggestions for a hedges and edges scheme. So this would be an area-based payment for those linear tree features, all the boundaries. And the measure would be the canopy cover as measured from above. And the point of this would be to incorporate it into the new basic or universal sustainable element of the sustainable farming scheme, so that it actually is a financial contribution in recognition of the value of what's already there that is being maintained. And that would provide something which is not done at the moment, but it's easily measured, and those records are already part of the BPS records. Now that would still need to be supplemented by additional grants for more expensive interventions, such as major hedgerow restoration or indeed new planting. So that's our that's the basics of our hedges and edges suggestion. And then the other aspect of this would be looking at this wood pasture. Now, is there a mechanism for recognizing the value and encouraging the expansion of this partial tree cover? For example, especially in the uplands, for example, working up ravines and stream edges. Yeah, this is very much a farming system, and grazing is essential to this, but it needs to be managed grazing that actually allows for some possibility of tree regeneration, and the grazing is important for maintaining the ground vegetation and managing fire risk, for example. And we don't have a means of supporting that system at the moment. So our suggestion is that that needs looking at. And this is something that would be valuable in protected landscapes, not just on prime farmland. And then, turning to the question of increasing tree cover, this pie chart just puts the 180,000 hectare target into the context of the woodland we already have. So the three big green pie pieces at the top of the chart, that's the existing woodland cover in Wales. And all the other segments at the bottom are additional bits you could add into that. And our suggestion is that of that 180,000 hectares by 2050, a third of that, or perhaps even as much as a half, could come by increasing agroforestry, increasing the provision and use of trees on farms without taking land out of farming. And roughly half of that could be from expanding this linear hedges and edges network, and half could be from a gradual and slow expansion of wood pasture in the uplands. And don't forget, we have sort of 30 years to do this in. It doesn't need to be done overnight. Just to summarize, half our native cover is outside woods. Trees on farms provide a huge range of benefits, mixing public benefits and farming benefits. Hugely important on the public benefit side, and that justifies public funding. There's carbon issues there that need thinking through. We do need new and different support mechanisms. And lastly, there's a substantial opportunity there to help meet this woodland expansion target. So yeah, thank you.
Diolch, Jerry. Thank you very much for that. Very well articulated, sort of the benefits of the hedges and edges approach, and I think it's something that has captured the imagination of the farming sector, really, because it's not, in my opinion, deemed to be anything contentious, and they're quite, in some instances, easy wins, and doesn't compromise production, perhaps to an extent, as some of the other extreme measurements. So it's really good to see the work that you're doing. I think it's taken off very well. So yeah, well done on that. I will ask a question, Jerry. Like you mentioned, some of the policy interventions, perhaps to help upscale the hedges and edges approach. What do you think are the sort of current barriers to that? Why aren't we seeing sort of more hedges and edges being created at this moment? Is there a reason, do you think, for that?
Well, I think the most important one is the current schemes do not offer any incentive or acknowledge the value of what's already there. And I think that the first step is actually to acknowledge that all the surviving existing hedgerow and those other margins are valuable. They do need maintaining, and that is worth supporting. So value what we have, I think, is an essential starting point. And then, yes, the mechanisms for supporting additions, could be better. You know, there's no framework really in place at the moment for supporting any real form of agroforestry on any scale. It falls between the farming and forestry, and I think it very clearly belongs in the farming support.
I think also from a sort of personal point of view that the basic payment scheme can also be a hindrance to tree planting to some extent, because it's the scheme sort of punishes farmers almost for having trees on their fields, sort of, and that area is taken out of the calculation. So it's a financial disincentive almost to plant. But we're looking forward to hearing more about sort of what Welsh Government have in store for the future sustainable farming scheme.
We suggest turning that entirely on its head.
I'm sure then we can upscale the hedges and edges approach. Howell's asked the question, but I'll save that for all the panel speakers later. The question is, what's the definition of a perfect hedge in terms of width, height, trimming, and frequency? But I'll keep that one in the back pocket for now, if you don't mind, Howell. And we'll move on to Hilary, unless Mal is here. I can't see his name, but we'll move on to Hilary, who will talk a bit about hedgerow management, because there's been a lot of talk around creating woodland and creating new hedgerows. But as you say, Jerry, it's important to manage what we've got, and Hilary can share some of the reflections of the benefits of trees and hedges on her farm. So over to you, Hilary, if you want to share your screen. And you're on mute as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, here's Mal.
Oh, yeah, sorry for this. Yeah, so I'm stationary now. It's taking me a bit to get you.
Do you go with Mal first then, Rhys, and then I'll...
Yes, we'll stick to the original order. Thanks, Mal. The technical gremlins have gone away. If you want to introduce yourself and give an overview of, I think you're going to talk about sort of hedgerow management as well as a hedge laying contractor, aren't you? And some of the reasons why you think sort of hedgerow management maybe has been in decline over the past
certainly.
Really interesting to get your insight on that. Thank you.
Certainly. Not sure if my camera's working, is it?
We can only see your name at the moment.
Sort that out. There we go. Sorry. Right. Yeah. Hey, Rhys, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see you.
Good. Sorry about this. Right. So I think I'm good now. So yeah, hello. My name's Malcolm Edwards. I'm a local contractor, hedge laying contractor in Carmarthenshire. But I work pretty much up and down the M4 and then north up into Pybus and up into Ceredigion as well. So I've been hedge laying for probably in the region of 20 years now, and with more well, I suppose most of where I'm coming from is conservation related and the preservation of various different Welsh hedge laying styles. So I teach as well as contract, and it seems that there's not really that many people out there teaching. I'm not sure whether that's because of it being quite a challenging practice to deliver, and but there's certainly an incentive. There's huge numbers of people that are interested in learning to hedge lay. We're in people who are landowners, conservation practitioners, farmers, and people generally that are interested in heritage craft. I'm really keen on the preservation of the practice, as I said. And my viewpoint is that it is a dying craft. I mean, a lot of the people that I learned from are in their late 70s. There are contractors out there that are getting meterage rates, but a lot of them are there largely for the cash, which is small money really from the subsidies that are involved, that are offered for landowners. So it's a dying craft really, because majority of people that are hedge laying, like I said, are in their late 70s, still, involved in preserving what they've learned over a couple of generations. But it's dying largely because of the subsidies being so small, and farmers really seeing hedges as a burden. So there's no financial incentive really to manage hedgerows. There's no real incentive to grow them on, or to preserve them as a significant habitat for the nature that lives on every farm. So when you think of the subsidies that are offered in agroforestry, they're so small that it's not really a wonder there's less and less people that will be involved in the direct practice of cutting and pleaching, and encouraging the old heart in a hedge to grow it on and create habitat and stock-proof environments. So I've lost Rhys now for some reason.
No, you're still there, Mal?
Yeah, still there.
You.
Okay. So I mean, I think potentially with the mechanization of farming on a large scale, and so many small farms which have these small fields being bought up by bigger farms, you have the risk of small field systems that are part of our heritage in Wales being having bigger gateways, potentially losing hedgerows without us knowing about it. Because a lot of things happened in the 80s where hedges were grubbed up. Subsidies were offered to farmers to increase the size so that they could mechanize the production on their farms. I mean, we see, and I think we all know that hedges do get grubbed out on farms currently, and our rich, you can go anywhere in Wales and you can see the tiny little strip field systems that date back to the medieval placement of these those fields. The risk of if every farm is managed by mechanization, flailed twice a year, you've got habitat loss, you've got the loss of the old pleachers that are in the hedge, and you've also got the loss of diversity as well. So if we look into the next 20 years of farming and how we need to produce more food in Wales, we're not gonna see much in the way of old work left, and everything's at risk, including the productivity on land as well. So I'm a strong believer that the government and the agroforestry schemes that are coming into place now need to think differently about how they promote hedge laying and how they financially support landowners and people that and contractors and conservation practitioners alike, how they promote hedges as a significant part of the farm's health. So as far as I one of the ideas I had was that there was a gold, bronze and silver award scheme for right practice on farms. So that can be involved in, that could involve how land is set aside for small woodlands or coppice, how hedges have a good heart, whether there's a rotation system involved, a rotation system in place for how hedges are managed around the farm. I mean, I think, like I said, I've spoken to Rhys before about how the nature-friendly farming network could be a consultancy for the government, and suggestions, like positive suggestions and solutions, can be made at a higher level for things to be put in place, so that we aren't going to lose miles and miles of heritage and significant amounts of habitat. Then we need to work together somehow. I think we need to work together to create solutions. And another idea is that it goes back into the education system. So urban and non-urban environments recognize farming as working hand in hand with nature, and that's how it's always been. Pre-mechanization, we were all concerned about how our fields were stock-proof, and how it was nature was not separate to farming or production of food in this country. It was always part of it. So I think education and the national curriculum needs to recognise the significance of farming and in keeping us all fed. So we need to work on some solutions somehow.
You took the words right out of my mouth there, almost, Mal. I was going to sort of suggest that sort of the bronze, silver, gold approach.
Yeah.
It's almost sort of a results-based scheme, almost, but for hedgerow management. Yeah. And do you think that could potentially be a way of changing the mentality around hedgerow management? Because there's as farmers, we are often criticised for having nice sort of trimly squared hedges, and the kind of that look neat, I guess, and that you're able to kind of pop your head over and look at the livestock on over the field. But do you reckon that sort of results-based scheme could incentivise farmers to manage hedgerows a bit better and change that sort of mindset, moving away from short and nice and trim into sort of bigger, thicker and wilder hedgerows?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all right. You could still have a square, neat-looking hedge, as long as it doesn't look like a toothbrush. You know what I mean? A lot of them you can see straight through. I mean, you can still have a nice, thick, square hedge, but if it's got a good heart, if it's got a really thick heart of living creatures, it's going to be stock-proof. It's going to be rich in habitat. There's going to be some material decaying inside it. There's going to be loads of new material regrowing in it. I mean, the bronze, silver, gold idea would be something that contractors have to adhere to as well, because like the grant schemes in Glastier and Tirgofal and some of the better woodlands Wales, the incentive that was there in those schemes. You get a contractor and they'd fence, and they knew how to fence, they knew how to hedge, they'd give a good price. Which would the landowner wouldn't add say £2.50 on top of the subsidy. It would be you hedge for £2.85 per metre, and that is what you get. But when you think of that, you get the contractor that goes and lays that hedge for £2.85. Nobody goes back the next season to have a look at the regrowth. So then the farmer gets paid. There's your GPS reading of the work that's been done, and nobody goes back the next year to have a look at how healthy that hedge is. How healthy that hedge is. So I mean, award scheme needs to be adhered to with some form of quality scheme as well. Because it's all well and good decking loads of hedge and laying it flat and then it regrowing, but you're not talking about the money, you're talking about the longevity. So I mean, the new schemes need to be reviewed a different way, I think. I mean, I'm treading on I know I'm treading on a lot of toes by saying that, but I mean, contractors will be better for it.
There's a question coming in from Phil Roberts, Mal. Do you think it's achievable given time for all farmers to manage hedgerows in a cycle? If so, what will it take to support farmers to move away from the current practice? So yeah, I think a lot of when I speak to a lot of farmers, it's they want to get all the cutting done at once and kind of avoid that sort of rotational cutting. But obviously that is a key component of hedgerow management as well, isn't it? Kind of to cut in rotation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that the rotational cutting has always been there, isn't it? But rotational hedge laying it's not really part of anyone's thinking anymore. You're not like, if you've got, I don't know, 100 acres and you set 25 aside to lay, or you grow it on, or you choose specific hedges to grow on, then I mean, I guess the people that oversee the grant schemes need to have an idea of what's realistic for the farm as well, because it's not realistic there's not enough hedge layers to go and go around the place and look at it. Mechanization has to be hand in hand with sustainable hedge management as well. So, I mean, I know it's not realistic. I know it's not realistic for farmers to lay every single hedge on their land anymore. But I think the grant schemes that are offered need to come with officers maybe that have an idea what is realistic. Because the glass tier scheme seemed to have people come on to, I mean, my land's a good example of that. Some of the people that came on didn't really have an idea of what it was like digging a hole or like hand digging a strainer post thing. And the same goes for the hedges, I think. You need to have officers that come along with the agro-ecological schemes that have a clue, and are able to offer realistic solutions. I mean, it's definitely not realistic for someone who's got 1,000 acres to lay that whole 1,000 acres. But I mean, we need to look at what proportion of that farm can be managed, what proportion of the hedges on that farm can be managed realistically. Does that answer that question?
I think it does, Mal. Yes. Thank you very much for that, Mal. It's great to hear your sort of passion and enthusiasm around that, and it's always interesting to hear from a hedge laying contractor. It's not often you get that sort of personal insight and experience. So thank you very much for that. We'll move on to Hilary to hear more from a sort of farmer's perspective. So you've got some photos which hopefully kind of bring what Mal was saying to life almost, in terms of what sort of good hedgerow management looks like, and some of the insights and your learnings from your experiences at your farm as well. So if you want to share your screen and unmute yourself.
Right, are we sharing? From beginning?
Yes, play from beginning and it should be fine.
Cool. Good. So we're farming in North Wales. I haven't actually got very many pictures of our own hedges, but what I'm mostly talking about is just a bit of practical hedge management. And also, as part of my job, a couple of years ago, we carried out a survey of 100 farmers and smallholders, plus some educational establishments and some contractors, to sort of find out what the barriers were to having a thriving, healthy hedge community. So for a hedge to be a key component in the ecological jigsaw, acting as a home and a larder, a refuge, a highway, and a link through history, it needs a good thick base, plenty of width and height, and to be composed of a wide variety of different trees, shrubs, and other plants. So this is a bit of an answer to Howell's question earlier. Different hedge sizes, types, and features are of value to different species. So the best hedges for wildlife will be different around the farm, attracting a wider range of creatures. Short hedges with wide grass buffer strips are preferred by grey partridges, linnets, and yellowhammers. And tall and wide hedges, up to 4 meters high, suit turtle doves, bullfinches, and song thrushes. And it's good to have a good shrub layer and growth at the base, because loads of species will benefit from that, including hedgehogs and amphibians and reptiles and small mammals. But this is how farmers often see a tidy hedge. It has to be trimmed in this case because it borders the road, but you can see all the hedges in the fields in this picture, the same height and shape. And in the survey, the highest percentage of people said that they cut their hedges to have a tidy farm. And the biggest reason against not being able to let them grow big and shaggy and nice for wildlife was it would make the farm look a mess. And if they had a campsite, they felt that they needed a tidy farm. And if they were a tenant, then they often had a clause in their tenancy agreement that they had to keep all their hedges properly cut. The farmers who replied to the survey said that the hedges were important for shade and shelter and as stock-proof barriers and for wildlife, but most of them currently cut annually. Smallholders and nature-friendly farmers cut less frequently, and there are strongly held opinions on why annual cutting is preferable. There's a strong belief that changing hedgerow management to less frequent cutting or incremental cutting will make them taller and gappier rather than wider and bushier, and research has shown that that is wrong. And both contractors and farmers felt that cutting hedgerows less frequently could damage or kill the shrubs and trees. And again, that is a false illusion. Many respondents to the survey wanted more information to convince them of the benefits of changing hedgerow management to their livestock, wildlife, and the wider environment. But despite their concerns and their reservations, only 19% of the farmers said they wouldn't be interested in managing their hedgerows less frequently or intensively. But most of them would require a financial incentive to make those changes. It's really interesting that cutting every 3 years produced 2.5 times more hawthorn and blackthorn flowers, because the flowers only form on a twig that is more than a year old. So if you cut every year, you never get the twigs maturing to produce the flowers. And increased flower abundance attracts more pollinating insects, such as hoverflies, bees, and butterflies, and provides more hawthorn, blackthorn, and blackberries for overwintering wildlife like farmland birds and small mammals, especially if the hedges are cut in late winter. Cutting every 2 years compared to an annual cut produced more berries, but only when the cut was made in late winter and not autumn. And in addition, only blackthorn consistently produced more berries after a 2-year late winter cut. So overall, that was less benefit than a 3-year cut. If fields are waterlogged and a late winter cut would cause field damage, it can be cut using a track machine or cut at a reduced intensity earlier on in the year by cutting just 10 centimetres higher and wider than a conventional cut, so keeping some of this year's growth. And that results in 2 to 3 times more berries for overwintering wildlife on hawthorn, blackthorn, and bramble. Or you can leave the south side of a hedge uncut and cut the other side, or just cut the sides and allow the top to grow up and sort of work your way around the farm like that, having slightly less impact on wildlife. As Jerry said, it's really good to look after mature hedgerow trees and retain as much standing and fallen deadwood as possible. And then encourage new trees by selecting and marking saplings that look good and put a big ribbon on them so that you don't accidentally go straight through them. And scattered mature hedgerow trees are of really good importance to wildlife. And we've lost 4% of these trees in just the last 10 years. So we need another 30,000 new trees every year to keep numbers stable. They support deadwood insect species like beetles and insects for birds and bats to feed on. And then holes in the trees are nesting sites for birds, such as tree sparrows and barn owls, and roosting places for bats. And then ivy growing up trees provides nectar and berries when other food supplies are scarce, and it doesn't kill trees, so you shouldn't really cut it at the bottom. But ash, if it's not dying back, exposed trunks can support important lichens, so there it's good to cut the ivy back. It's also good to have food trees like crabapple, and a single mature hawthorn growing up in your hedge will produce as many berries every year as 200 metres of hedge cut the previous year. So, and where you've got mature trees, just extend the headland out to protect the roots from damage when things are being cultivated. Leaving a 2-metre buffer strip will protect the hedge from inputs and provide habitat for wildlife. And you can do this using an electric fence to let you access the hedge when you need. And the buffer strips provide habitat for insects and mammals and birds. If you need to fence the boundary because of livestock, it's great if you can leave a 2 to 3 metre area each side, which you could get in and trim if you need to. This is the management cycle approach, which leads to really good hedge structural diversity. So the cycle starts with new planting or rejuvenating an existing hedge by laying or coppicing it. And then over the next 20 years, the shrub layer gets cut at intervals to keep it thick, while being allowed to gradually increase in width and height. And when it starts to get gappy at the base, it can be allowed to grow up, ready for either laying or coppicing in the start of a new cycle. It's best to coppice in sections to reduce the impact on wildlife, cutting back the main stem to just above ground level at a 45-degree angle so that water can run off. After that, several shoots will grow up off the cut stump, and they may need protecting from animals. And then in the second year, you cut those shoots back to 45 centimetres in length, and then you're away again. Many of the farmers in the survey we did were concerned about damage to their flail cutters if they cut less often. If you just drive a bit slower and cut, do sort of 2 passes with the flail, it should be fine. That should cut stems up to about 35 to 45 millimeters in diameter. But you can get things like a Slane Track 1.8 meter finger bar hedge trimmer on a tracked excavator, which cuts in a single pass, so you don't have to go back and damage the ground. You stay in one position and cut 4 or 5 meters of hedge, and then do the side and then the top, and then go forward to the next section. So you've got really good control. And then tree shears can be attached to the digger, and they'll grab hold of a tree and pull it across a cutting blade, and the cut off material can be put where you like. You can fill gaps with the brash or stack it out of the way into wildlife habitat piles, sort it for firewood or chip it. And this machine can really help with managing bigger grown out hedges. You just have to make sure not to get carried away, because I've talked to a few contractors who said it's really easy to just annihilate everything and get a bit of a poor reputation. But take a long-term approach and don't blitz all the hedges at once, and it can be a useful tool. One of the key advantages over the flail is a really clean, neat cut, which is less damaging, which is really important when managing hedges on an extended rotation. But with larger stumps, it's best to finish them off with a chainsaw. And farmers using these techniques have found that the total cutting cost for one hedge to be roughly the same if the hedge is cut once a year or once every 3 years using a track digger, which cause less compaction and less field damage. So one of the farmers quoted in the survey, the key thing is mindset. An uncut hedge to me no longer looks messy, whereas a bonsai flailed hedge looks like a massive missed opportunity. As farmers, we tend to hate bare fallow, and that's how I feel about an annually flailed hedge when it's not getting a chance to produce a crop of flowers or berries. And this is just a brown hair street butterfly. If you let blackthorn suckers grow along field edges, they'll provide young shoots, which the brown hair street butterfly lays her eggs on. And then you just cut a percentage of those stalks back every 3 to 5 years. It's really good to encourage outgrowths out of the hedges. The very best ones have clumps of brambles and roses growing out from the side. In my case at home, my sheep like to string themselves up in those, so that's a bit of an issue. And together with some suckering blackthorn or elm growth. And these patches create a scalloped and a soft edge between the shrub layer and the crop. And many birds and dormice like to nest in bramble outgrowths, and brown hair street butterflies lay their eggs in the blackthorn. And patchy outgrowths between 1 and 2 meter wide are ideal. So to restore a gappy hedge, if you've got one like this, which isn't stock proof and it doesn't give much shelter or interest for wildlife, it's a good idea to coppice it back in sections over a few years and plant up any gaps using locally sourced native hedge plants in early winter when the ground's warm and moisture's available, and protect them with tree tubes or mulch mats if you need to. And this coppicing reduces competition for the new plants and produces a thicker bottomed hedge as the coppice regenerates. The good news is there are last year small grant application windows still available, which have, I think it's £4.50 a metre funding available for planting new hedges or for restoration, plus a contribution for protective fencing. And as Mel didn't have any pictures of a laid hedge, laying a hedge is much less drastic than coppicing, but it needs skilled labour, and around 5 to 10% can be laid in a year in sections to allow wildlife to thrive in the sections between. And it's a really good long-term plan to manage hedges like that. Beautiful. This is just a bit of a brash that you can use to make a barrier to stop young hedges being grazed or create habitat piles. It was interesting surveying the educational establishments in the survey that we did about the hedges. that there's this massive separation between what is taught in the same university on the conservation programme and countryside management and what's taught on the agricultural courses. So the agricultural courses are told, yep, trim your hedges every year, that's nice and tidy. And the conservation courses are taught about 2 and 3 year cutting and incremental cutting and letting standard trees grow. So it's probably true for a whole range of habitat and countryside management topics. And as future agricultural support systems are likely to focus on environmental outcomes and public goods, farmers need a better understanding of the wider environmental impacts of management choices. And therefore, we really need to sort of address this dichotomy in education and training. So manage hedges over your lifetime and not on an annual basis. Thank you for listening. Any questions, welcome.
Diolch, Hilary. Thank you very much. That report sounds really interesting. I just wonder whether that's publicly available or whether you've shared that with with Welsh Government or policymakers at all.
Yeah, well, it's an NRW. It was done for the NRW, but I haven't seen it anywhere. Oh, there we are. Johnny Holson said conservation evidence. There we are. Is that on CEH, Johnny? Maybe.
And I think you've answered Howell's question as well about what's the sort of perfect hedge, and I guess the answer is that there isn't such thing as a perfect hedge, I guess, because different wildlife prefer different types of hedges as well. So
it's ideal to have a variety of stuff around your farm, probably. And if you've got lapwings, don't.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in some instances, I guess hedgerows can offer a sort of a perch for predators who will predate on ground nesting birds, I guess. So in some instances, it might not be the best option, perhaps, to plant a hedgerow. But I think one of the take homes there is, for me, is not to overly manage hedgerows. Yes, if I'm accurate enough to say that.
What's the definition of an unperfect hedge? Well, I think some of those that we saw that look nice and neat and tidy, I think they're very unperfect.
Thanks you, Hilary. We'll move on to our last speaker, Ruth. So Ruth will be talking more about woodland as opposed to sort of hedges and edges approach, and I guess a lot of the discussions around planting woodlands on farmland has been quite contentious and seen in a sort of negative light, perhaps. But hopefully what we've got here is probably there's a demonstration of how woodland and sort of farmland can go hand in hand, and the multiple benefits that they can yield. So over to you, Ruth.
Diolch, Rhys. Noswaith da pawb. I'm on 70-acre holding in North Wales near Abergele, where quite a lot of that land has been put over to mixed broadleaf woodlands over the last 25-30 years. And I'm hoping I can convince some farmers out there that there's a great benefit to be had from increasing tree cover on some of your land, both to improve for wildlife, to be great for whatever stock you've got, but also as a way of building a diversifying, profitable business on your farm. In terms of advice on how to go about planting trees and starting the process of having profitable broadleaf on your farm, really, there's a lot of broadleaf that was planted in the 80s and 90s under grant schemes, and in a lot of cases either the establishment was poor or the trees, once they had been established, the management was poor. So one problem that we have as farmers is we might have the land, we might have the machinery to do this sort of work, but we don't necessarily have the expertise. It's not what we know a lot about, and getting really good advice for your particular situation is going to be really important. The photograph in the background you can see here is of a field we planted 8 years ago, and it's quite an interesting field in terms of establishment of woodland because we had 3 sorts of vegetation type on this field. In the background you can see we've got the rows and rows of tree shelters on some grassland, and the young man in the foreground is called Tom. He looks like he's wearing a gorse bush. So he's on a bank which was about quarter of an acre of really, really tall gorse. And then just to his left, you can see tree shelters there in some brown vegetation. Well, that's some bracken land. And really how you have to approach planting and establishing trees in these different vegetation types is really quite different. Grassland is actually the most difficult sort of vegetation to establish trees in, especially if you've got any sort of fertile land and the grass growth is strong. The grass will compete for water and nutrients with your trees, and the competition is going on underneath the ground. So an awful lot of woodland planting schemes fail because there isn't adequate control of grass after you've planted your trees. Historically, I've tried to advise people doing planting schemes as part of helping them with their planting schemes, and I've tried to emphasize, you really, really need to control the grass, and that means you have to spray it off with a herbicide, or you need to actually physically remove the turf, or you need to really heavily mulch the area around the tree. And they say, oh, surely I can put my chickens around it. And I say, no, you have to actually like swamp the grass or kill the grass in some way. And they say, surely I can just trim around it. And I say, no. And I think this message we need to get across around establishment in grassland is it's not about cutting the grass. It's not about the grass, stopping the grass from getting too tall. It's about stopping the competition underground. So here, it's probably not a very nature-friendly farming photograph, but it's the only time in my 16 years here we've actually used glyphosate on the farm. You can see around each tree there's a little patch of yellow where we sprayed off an area to favour the tree. This was just a 4 hectare patch. The other 16 hectares, the turf was actually removed, reefed off. Which is an absolutely brilliant thing to do, but it's like very laborious, and we chose not to do it this time. So anyway, that's the first thing. In grassland, you really need to control the grass. The patch that Tom's in was a big bracken bank, so we needed to cut the gorse, sorry, a big gorse bank, so we needed to cut the gorse. We at first hoped that we'd be able to just sort out the stems and the brash and take the stems for firewood and just leave big heaps of brash on the field, but the brash was extensive that we were going to have nowhere to plant, so we did actually burn the brash in this case, and then actually we had a lovely clear site, then the planting was very easy. The gorse didn't mind at all. We actually had to go in there at the start of the 3rd growing season to go in and cut the gorse again around the trees to make sure they weren't overtopped. And we actually removed guards quite early because we were getting really good establishments, and we used that opportunity to remove guards. The 3rd vegetation type, the bracken you can see to Tom's left, is the bracken. And if you've got bracken on your land, you've got an absolute jewel of a site to plant trees. So you don't really have any ground preparation. You just turn up in the winter with your bag of trees, you kick some of the bracken aside, put your spade in, and you plant your tree. And the chances are that the soil you're planting underneath the bracken is going to be absolutely great soil. So really, that is an absolute dream. The issue with your bracken doesn't come in until the following autumn, where the threat is bracken can easily grow over 6 foot tall. And the threat of bracken to your trees is that it collapses in the autumn, and it'll collapse over your trees, and it can very easily swamp the tree, break the guard, pull the tree to the ground, and your tree doesn't recover from that. So cutting bracken with a hook in the in midsummer means that you can stop that overtopping of the bracken on your trees. And added benefit, especially with these really dry springs and early summers that we're getting, if you drag that bracken around the base of the tree, you turn your sort of bracken potential menace into an absolutely fantastic mulch for over your trees. So that's ground preparation. You need to exclude browsers. So obviously your site's going to be stock proofed. In our case, we also have a fairly unmanaged fallow deer population, and they were used to using this field quite extensively. All the big gorse and the bracken were fantastic cover. So we had to exclude the deer with deer fencing. When I planted this, I planted it with my partner David, and I'd been on the farm at the time about 6 or 7 years. David had been here since, well, somewhat longer. He's been here since he was 15 and had already planted 16 hectares of woodland. So I felt like I had fantastic advice on my shoulder. I felt very confident that all this effort we were going to put in was going to work, because I had a very skilled, very knowledgeable woodland manager on my shoulder who knew the site very well. But we still got floored by the second summer, realizing that some of our trees were dying. And what was happening was that we'd always been very proud of the fantastic ant hills on these fields. And the ants didn't seem to mind our tree planting at all. In fact, they saw the tree shelters we were using as the absolutely ideal place to build their ant hill up into this tree shelter, take advantage of this like real hot house environment. And that environment, that the presence of the ants in the tree shelter was killing small trees really rapidly. So the photograph you see on the bottom right of the screen there is exactly this case. So I've broken the front off the tree shelter. You can see the tree in the middle there, and all that soil you can see around the stem of the tree is actually an ant's nest where it's built around the tree. So this prompted us to do a lot of emptying of tree shelters, and really prompted us. We seem to have quite a low point in our rabbit population at the time. So we did take the opportunity to take guards off within years 3 and 4, which was absolutely fantastic. It meant we could take the tree guards off entirely. We stacked them, and within 18 months they were on another tree planting project. So that was really great for recycling and plastics debates, which is obviously a big issue. So there's a little bit of a quick stop tour around different sorts of establishment. The next thing is to love forest work, because if you're going to try and get broadleaf for timber on your woodlands, then the sad thing is previous generations haven't invested in this, and so we're left with all the work. Really, forestry should be something where the work I do now is going to be benefiting the harvest that the next generation is going to benefit from, and that is paid for by the products I can get out of my woodland from the previous generation. Unfortunately, we're in a very degraded landscape, and it's kind of behoves our generation to put a load of work in, do that investment, so that we've got this productive, sustainable landscape again. So on the left here, so the major operations once our woodland is established is pruning, because we want our trees to have a nice clean stem, so that only any knots in the timber are going to be in the core of the timber, and then most of the timber will be knot free. Any knot in the timber is a defect in terms of its strength and limits the sorts of uses it can have. Also, dead branches need to be pruned off, because dead branches are a root of become dead within the tree, and that is also a flaw. So here we are. Another thing we've been doing is lots of thinning, and actually in that new plantation, thinning operations can start really young. So we've got a lot of trees in our new plantation, our 8-year-old plantation, that we're also already starting to do some thinning work, because the establishment is so strong and the trees are growing so well. The threat in an intimate species mix is that different species of tree are going to establish at different rates and are going to grow at different rates. So, for example, oak, which can grow really quite fast. However, it's not going to keep up in the first 10 years with the likes of, certainly on our site, birch, silver birch and wild cherry. So we've certainly been going through our young woodland in years 6 and 7, already taking out some of the birch next to our most promising oak trees to make sure that they don't lose their head in the canopy. The photograph on the left, my partner David on the left, and a friend Mike in the foreground, who helps us complete some more winter work. This is in a block at age 15, having its second thinning since it was planted. And at this stage, the timber that we're getting out is really just firewood quality. So you can see the start now of some really quite smart stems. They've been pruned and they've been given lots of space. And there we are with our bit of a firewood crop, in loving our forest work, because at the moment, what we're getting out of the woodland is really quite low quality, and we're still in a strong investment phase. The biggest thing I emphasize with all our woodland work is the most important thing we do is control grey squirrels. And without that operation, there would be absolutely no point doing any of the other work. The grey squirrel is an American grey squirrel, and it's a non-native invasive, and it just does not fit in our ecosystem. And in terms of us being able to embrace native woodlands on our farms and see it as a productive thing, being able to eradicate the grey squirrel would be an absolute game changer. The threat it gives to our woodland is that it will bark strip during the summer months a lot of our native trees. So particularly vulnerable are species like birch and beech and oak and sweet chestnut, if you include that as native. And it will also attack things like ash at times, and certainly it'll bark strip off of acer species like Norway maple or sycamore. When it does that, when the tree's at quite a young age, so it wrecks the timber potential of that tree. It also reduces the potential of that tree to sequester carbon. It reduces the biodiversity value of that tree, because that tree is never going to grow to be a magnificent veteran tree. So the fantastic oak and sycamore, and I know that everybody likes sycamore, but I think it's a great tree actually. Huge wild cherry, whatever, those magnificent veteran trees that we see in our countryside, once they go, at the moment with grey squirrels as creating this problem that they do with our young trees, those trees are not going to be replaced. So grey squirrel right now, this time of year, it's one of our major jobs. So finally, reaping the rewards. It kind of feels here like we've spent 20 years doing an awful lot of work very virtuously. The very exciting thing that's happening for us in the last 4 or 5 years is that we are starting to see our woodlands repaying us already. In the last 5 or 6 years, we started making fence posts out of some of the sweet chestnut that we were taking out of the woods, and found that even though our sweet chestnut is quite knotty and quite wiggly, and the trees we're taking out are really the trees with the poorest form, best trees are staying in the woodland, actually it still wants to cleave. So we're hand cleaving sweet chestnut fence posts. The fence posts you can buy, all farmers know, are really not lasting more than 5 or 6 years. The quality is really poor because the material it's made out of is non-durable conifer species, and the only thing that ever made that something useful to put in the ground is that it was full of toxins. Sweet chestnut, on the other hand, has got heartwood which is filled with tannins, so similar to oak trees, and so it's naturally durable timber, but it grows faster than oak, and also it has a greater proportion of heartwood than oak. So whilst our oak are not quite at the stage yet where we can cut them for fence posts, the sweet chestnut that we're taking out has plenty of heartwood, and we're producing really nice fence posts. We haven't bought any fencing material on the farm for, at least 5 or 6 years, maybe more than that. You can see the posts on the left-hand side there. Below that is a big stack of firewood. So up till now, we've been using our thinnings and ourselves as firewood, and maybe supplying a few neighbours. We're really stepping up our thinning now. We've got the confidence, I think, to realise that every year that we've looked at our wood after thinning and frightened ourselves with how bare it looks, actually we've not done enough. And so we're really going through the woodlands trying to give it a really good thin, and have started selling our firewood in 25-ton loads to a local firewood processor and seller, the skills centre in Bodfari. And firewood prices, as you know, are quite good. So that's really giving us good support for our woodland work. The top left picture of that style, it's a very beautiful style, also made out of sweet chestnut. So something that's really changed in the last 2 or 3 years is the very best of the stems that we're taking out in our thinnings, we're taking to a sawmill and having planked. We are incredibly lucky to have a sawmill just 1 mile up the road, and a really it would be great to see more small sawmills around the place, because really what you can do with improving, getting some economic return early out of your woodland, if you've got a small sawmill nearby, it just makes a huge difference. That style was a commission, 5 styles for a customer, and that was made out of sweet chestnut from here. Those are going to go up on some land above Lake Burnley, and we feel very confident that they're going to last with that lovely durable timber. We do have some larch in the mix, which was going to come out as an early crop, and David up there has been making larch gates again with some sawn timber. So those are the sort of products that we're starting to get out of our woodland already. This is at 26 years old, this broadleaf woodland, having put in, okay, quite a bit of energy. It's now starting to become, what we're starting to sniff at is a business. So my partner and I set ourselves up as a business called Broadleaf Wales just over a year ago, and we're going to use that to develop both a sales platform for our products, and we're really hoping that we're going to increase our customer base as our woodlands grow and increase the range and quality of the timber that's coming out of our woodland. But biodiversity, what else do we get out of our woodland? We've got lovely wildlife in the woodland, and we certainly feel that the more that our woodlands develop, the bird song every spring just blows us away. And every spring we're telling ourselves, surely it wasn't this loud last year. We're seeing lovely butterfly species. There's the meadow brown bear in one of the woodlands. Fantastic fungi cropping up. If anybody knows any specialist that wants to come and have a look and tell us more, we'd be delighted to have somebody with the right sort of eye to really tell us what we've got in our woodland. And I think I want to really emphasize what I hope we're doing is we're creating a product which is going to be timber products which are going to be useful in the local economy and that are going to help diversify the farm business. But we're doing that hopefully alongside improving opportunities for wildlife. In the middle there, we've got David dragging some hazel out of the woods about a month or so ago, and some representatives from our suckler herd who got into that field about 2 hours earlier and don't seem to know that what they're supposed to eat is grass, because they've come right over and started chomping the hazel leaves off those sticks. And certainly our sort of hedges and our overhanging trees around the fields are an instant draw whenever we let the cows into a new field during the spring and summer. And the woodland that you can see in the background there is sheltering our hay field from northerly winds. So it's really made a difference to the microclimate on the farm. And when our summer's hard work is over, down in the bottom right there is cherry trees turning gold and red in the autumn. And I think they're a match for any American maple. So I think what I'd like to say to farmers is we've got a situation where it seems like it's difficult for young people or the young members of your households to have a living on your farm. Farmers have got bigger and more mechanized, and there seems to be less work for people. we've got 20 hectares of woodland and we've got too much work. And we're rapidly finding ourselves in the situation where we think within another 4 or 5 years, this woodland is going to be so productive, it could support somebody else being self-employed, working here, at least one person. And that's on 20 hectares. We think that's a big holding for wood. And in terms of, if you can, I would like the next generation, maybe one of your next generation is going to take over the farm, and maybe one's going to be a contractor, and maybe one's going to do something else, but maybe one of them could be your farm champion and start at young age planting an area of your farm and put in that investment. And by the time that they're maybe my age, they're going to be finding themselves with more work and more income than they know what to do with. The other half of our Broadleaf Wales company is as a consultancy and advice business to try and help share the path that we've taken to get to where we are now, and to share our experience and support other people who want to do something around timber or woodland on their land. I'm a Farming Connect mentor for Woodland. We can help people with planting grants for Welsh Government. We're about to be helping Woodland Trust with supporting their members and people coming to them for advice and helping to deliver their grant support programs. And we're also starting to run woodland management courses at Broadleaf itself, and that will expand. So we look forward to meeting you soon and sharing your woodland ambitions. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch o galon, Ruth. Diolch am rannu dy profiadau. Thank you very much for that. It's really interesting points you made there. I think one of the many pushbacks I hear when people talk about sort of planting native commercial sort of broadleaf woodland is that the benefits are too far down the line, that they're sort of too long term, if you like. But obviously you've made it work kind of, and you've seen very short term reward. So is that a myth then, do you think, that sort of belief?
Yeah, I think there's this idea that you plant a tree, but you never see it in your lifetime, isn't there? There's this that phrase that goes round that annoys me a little bit. Happiness is to plant a tree that you never get to sit under the shade, or something like that. And going, don't be daft. That's really ridiculous, you know. Here's my woodland. I made sure it got established really well, and I'm having to thin it at 6 years old. So you know, I'm sitting under the shade at 5 years. So and I think yeah, if woodlands, if they're not managed, they kind of also they will stall. So a nice thing about woodland in a way is it sits and waits for you. So if I don't thin this year and I think you've been in 2 years time instead, or 3 years time instead, or 5 years instead, or 10 years instead, it'll sit and wait for me. But in 10 years, that woodland's going to be a lot better, a lot more productive. It's going to be better for biodiversity too, if I thinned it in that first or second year. So this is like, there's quite a lot of studies going on around how fast can you grow oak, because oak traditionally is seen as something that takes an awful long time before it's harvestable. And we've got some measurements on, and so there's this idea about free growing trees, about really giving them lots of room in your thinning operations, that they have room to grow. And we're aiming to grow oak in 70 or 80 years. That's what we're on to here. And one issue with conifer grown fast, and the aim in the big conifer industry is to grow these trees fast, is that actually the faster you grow conifer species, the poorer quality the timber is. But actually broadleaf timber, the actual wood itself, the cells it's comprised of are different, and so actually growing broadleaf fast actually doesn't compromise the quality of the timber. So the more work I put in, the better those trees are going to be sooner. And I mean, we're at the start of this journey now, where we're starting to see some repay, and we're just incredibly excited about it. We can just see how, I don't know, our valleys could be absolutely transformed by having this native timber, durable timber.
That's brilliant. Maybe an important lesson for the Welsh Government forestry policy folk, because yeah, there's been a big sort of drive historically and currently to plant sort of fast-growing non-native species, and we know in the wrong place it does have an effect on sort of on biodiversity, and can have a negative outcome on climate as well. So I think that's an important take-home message.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with the conifer industry is it tends to be fairly big blocks, single species, and constantly there is a new pest here, a new pest there that is threatening all those species actually. And we have species are also, our broadleaf species are being threatened by various pests. But what we're hoping is that by having a mix of trees, and also by having regular thinnings, that those individual trees have got lots of space and lots of room to grow, that what we've got is really healthy woodland, and it's going to, and the fact that it's diverse and that it's well managed is going to mean that it's going to be more resilient to pests. We're really looking forward to seeing how our woodland looks around ash dieback in 10 years time, for example.
A question I wanted to ask around grazing. I think, Jerry, you might have touched on this in your presentation, but speaking to one of our members the other day, and she was saying that they fenced off a piece of sort of hill land, and it's been fenced off for maybe 10-20 years, and there's been hardly any natural regeneration of trees at all. I tend to think that that's because a lack of grazing or lack of sort of trampling to create the sort of trampling effect to allow trees to grow. I don't know whether that's something you've had experience of at all.
That's really interesting. I mean, you need kind of two things for your tree to get natural regen, I guess. You need a seed source for a start. So you need somewhere for the trees to come from. But the other thing you need is suitable ground conditions. And one thing that we noticed, the first photograph I showed you with Tom and his gorse bush, and in the background we'd sprayed those squares off with glyphosate. What we found is that by the second summer after we'd planted and got rid of our livestock off the ground, is we got loads of regen. We've got loads of birch, we've got quite a lot of oak, we got a little bit of beech, we got loads of willow, and it was all in that metre squared. So the regen wasn't happening in the grasslands. The regen was happening in the areas where we'd taken the grass competition away. So I think natural regeneration, I know there's loads of reasons why that's really attractive. You know, it's cheaper, you're gonna, you've not got the thorny issues of what to do around tree shelters and all that sort of thing. But you probably do need to do some sort of ground preparation, some sort of disturbance that allows trees to seed in and not be competing against the grass.
Do you want to give me
I completely agree with that. Natural regeneration works if it's a managed process. It's not just leaving land to it. You have to get the ground conditions right, and yeah, livestock are a valuable tool for that.
Right, we are 15 minutes over time. I think that thank you all for the really interesting talks. I think, and thank you for all the comments as well. It's been really active comments and discussions in the chat bar. I think one of the three key things for me I've taken home from this session is really sort of the importance of integrating trees and farmland. And I think that there is certainly a role for both, and there are huge opportunities there for the farming industry to showcase what we can do in meeting the Welsh Government tree planting targets and the associated benefits for biodiversity and climate as well. I think we've talked a lot about management, haven't we? And I think it's really important to get the management right, and particularly schemes and government policies that incentivize management. There's a lot of comments in the chat bar about sort of lack of funding in that respect, which puts off sort of appropriate hedgerow management. I think really important, building on what you were saying, Ruth, I think the provision of advice and guidance is really important as well. Perhaps as farmers, we just aren't aware of what a good hedgerow looks like. We're not aware of the management techniques. Same thing applies to sort of woodland management as well. We're very good at looking after livestock and the land. So maybe it's just something that has gone by the wayside maybe over the last few years. So the provision of advice and guidance for me around these things are really important as well. So I'll just quickly ask a question. I know we've got Welsh Government folk here on the call. So one question, and if I get an answer from each of the speakers, if you could ask Welsh Government to do one thing to try and sort of scale some of the things that we're talking about today, what would that thing be in 30 seconds each? If I'll start with Jerry.
I think it's that financial incentive that recognises the value of the hedgerows that are already there and encourages, good management.
Mal?
I think bring the officers out that are meant to be making the decisions on the financial support for landowners to see what it takes, so that there's a realistic impression of what is needed on the land.
Brilliant. Hilary? You're on mute, sorry, Hilary.
What's this one thing to make a difference?
What one thing, if you could ask Welsh Government to do to try and sort of upscale some of the things that we've been talking about today in terms of creation or managing hedgerows, etc.
Well, looking at the chat, it is to support smallholders as well as larger landowners, and I know that they're planning to do that. And don't deduct land when it's got trees on, but fund it, finance. I think particularly wood pasture and things like that, which are currently very difficult to get going. And I think wood pasture is going to be really important for shade and shelter with climate change, and a beautiful landscape feature as well.
Ruth?
Yeah, it has to be grey squirrels. We need to deal with grey squirrels. It's the game changer for being able to have productive, native broadleaf, sustainable, beautiful, biodiverse woodlands, which also make sure that we're going to be growing healthy trees now that are going to be the veterans in 400 years' time. And that's the legacy that we're failing to give future generations now.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I will end the webinar. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am wrando.
Wow.
Overall.